So speaking on the topic of Vidya and The Witcher, I've been ripping The Witcher quite heavily, The Witcher 3. One of the things that I actually really, really like about it is that it takes like I think it probably does the best job of any fantasy series, like incorporating like real world elements.
Mm.
Like a lot of like the different factions and kingdoms and I guess government groups and stuff like that. They're all
More so than June.
yeah, I would say.
Oh, okay.
Um like they I think it just does a better job of just like kind of recreating all that. And I think my biggest gripe is that we always like it's pretty common to bring fantasy elements into or real world elements into fantasy works and stuff like that. But to me, it always just feels like very, very like surface level.
Mm.
So I was like, I'm wondering why you think that is. Because, like, for example, like in The Witcher 3, like the Duchy of Toussaint is like a mixture of uh like France, Italy, Austria, like all packaged into one, but like they go beyond and it's like you could tell like all the different names of different characters and stuff like that. They're all
Mhm.
like very, very similar to names that you would see in these different places and stuff like that, like in the real world.
I think I have an answer for you.
Lay it on me.
As someone, Luca, I'm sure you can relate to this. As someone who's made fantasy worlds for the purpose of playing Dungeons and Dragons, it is just so much easier if you can go, okay, this region of people who have this specific uh aesthetic, uh let's just say they're Russian, okay, and let's leave that there. And then over here, okay, these people are Scandinavian. And then so when we're playing the game, they're like, oh, what's the name of the shopkeeper? I'm like, Lars, his name is Lars. And it's just so much easier to keep track of things that way, because it's like, this is my proxy for Russians. And instead of them being Russian, they look like Roman gladiators and they have the attire of that, but they're Russians and they're named Russian. And that's different enough that now it's fantasy. And these people, these elves that have dark skin and live in this jungle over here, they're French. So I give them French names, and that's different enough that now we're in a fantasy world. Because yeah. So I don't know. My explanation would just be like, it's easy to sort of take things that already exist and put them into your world and speak on them within the context of your world as it would apply to our world as well. But it's easier than just to come up with naming conventions, which is
Do you
really
think
hard.
do you think that's just like more so because I guess in the context of D&D, it's easier for the players, or is it just easier like in creation?
It's easier for the DM to be like
Yeah.
on the spot, like, yo, what's this guy's name? Sven. It is Sven.
And also, like, as in our world, names carry weight, right? If someone tells you their last name and that last name has Spanish origin or something, you can start to figure out where that person may come from and how you're interacting with them today, right? Like, whether they part of like a colony, like what used to be a colony, and that's why they have that type of last name, or if they have ancestry hailing from those regions, or married into a family that does stuff like that. Like, and so for D&D, for characters, if you like, oh, you find the letter that has all this incriminating stuff on it and it's signed by so and so sans les bleus. And it's, and it's like
du fromage.
Yeah. Yeah. And they can be like, oh, this must have been an elf. And maybe they're wrong and maybe they're right, but it implies something.
Okay. I guess a follow-up to that is, if you had the resources as like a major fantasy production company, like let's say if you're going to make your own Lord of the Rings, like would you go the route of incorporating new, I guess, real world elements, like I guess for example like aesthetics, or just I guess kind of like mirroring certain events in real world history and stuff like that? Like would you do that, or would you prefer to just completely start from scratch?
Go ahead, Luca.
I mean, if you're adapting a work, like you're saying, like making a new Lord of the Rings adaptation, or like doing like the Amazon TV show,
I mean more so just like that was just like an
Your
example.
version, like a
Yeah,
Wheel
like
of Time.
if you're just making like your own IP, I guess.
I feel like you'd want to incorporate real world elements to just ground it in something for the sake of the audience, if anything, and for your own simplicity. Like if you're having to create your own characters and story within this world, like you're adapting a story within, I don't know, the world of Middle Earth that isn't the Lord of the Rings story. Um, like I feel like giving yourself that extra work would sort of be unnecessary, and you'd want some real world elements, but then you run the risk of alienating the source material so much from like the people that know it, that it's like, what are you even making at that point? So I feel like it's a fine line you want to walk, like
Yeah.
maybe more visually, like in subtle ways you want to echo our world.
I almost feel like it's very hard to have original ideas, in the sense that, like, I think everything we make is inspired by something at this point.
Mhm.
Like, so it might be tough to like separate the aesthetic of one army historically and then apply that to a different group of people from a different part of the world. But that's something that's effective, right? Like, we know this is a part of a faction because they're dressed in this way. They have loose, flowy robes and sandals. We know like might come from a certain place, just like in the fantasy world. And so then, okay, well, I can have my people who come from the desert dressed like this way because we know from our real world that it's practical to dress that way in that sort of climate. But when it comes to like language, I don't know. I feel like accents are hard to create. Like I don't know where you would start with creating an accent, because accents come from people learning how to speak one language and then speaking a second language and carrying some of their pronunciations over to the next language. So without establishing a first language, how could you possibly create an accent? You know what I mean?
He used the default British one.
Yeah.
Generic British man voice.
But yeah, I feel like, but accents, you can really use them wherever. I think what would be awkward if you use like real language, like if you had like random characters like speaking French, and
Yeah.
something, it's just like, I mean, for me, that might throw me off, especially if you know the language you're speaking and you're like acting like that's like some kind of fantasy language.
Yeah. It's just saying nothing. Just omelette de fromage sacre bleu. They said there's a plan to it.
Yeah, I think that's, like as I said, like The Witcher, especially the Witcher 3 series, just like it does like a phenomenal job with a lot of the languages. It's just like, because I've never really paid attention until this playthrough, but like it's just like amazing to see. And like I said, with all the other factions and stuff like that, like I find that they're like blended from real world, like in such a way that it's almost like they did like their own, like it's like for example, I said like Duchy of Toussaint is like a mixture of, I guess,
Renaissance
Austrian,
Italy.
and like France, like southern France and Austria, but at the same time I would say that Nilfgaard is pretty close to like the Holy Roman Empire, which would be more Austrian if anything. But like at the same time, like there's like it just, I just think it's cool like how it's blended in that way, where it is almost like brand new. Um, Also like the accents are, I feel like they're done really well, which is honestly, this is one of the reasons why I dislike the TV show, is because I feel like the TV show fails to capture that, like the way that both the video and the books captured it.
With their accents.
Yeah, or just in general, like it's almost like it's familiar, but like just like barely.
I mean,
Like
I
to the
agree with
point
you.
where
The TV show does not feel like.
I don't know, the TV show just feels like a generic YA Netflix adaptation.
Oh, come on. YA.
Shots fired.
Yeah, man.
I don't know about YA, but I definitely agree that it doesn't feel like like the Witcher 3 or the books.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
Do you guys have a go-to accent if you're trying to voice a NPC character?
I'm not good. I'm not good at accents at all.
Yeah,
But
no.
if anything, I'll just stereotype to my origins. Eastern European.
Yeah, I remember when you first started playing in my campaign, you did that for one session, and you're like quickly like,
I was
"Oh,
like,
man."
nah, this is effort.
It's way too monotone for
I'll
that.
throw it in as a DM from time to time, but
Yeah. I think this is side, but I think what you're really good at is physical character. You know what I mean?
I do like to embody, especially gods.
Yeah, embody. Holy. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I think I think if I had to settle on one thing, it'd be that it's easier to take things and then imagine how those things might work together in a fictional setting. Like, well, what would a society based off of, let's just say, South African culture meets Arctic people? What would that look like? Where would the, what things would be they would leave behind and like sort of form together, and what would that look like? Then there you go. There's your fantasy race. Here are waterbenders, like, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Something like that.
I mean, you draw from what you know, like
Exactly. Yeah.
like you even if you create a brand new culture, like you draw from things that you've heard, or like you hear of a custom in a culture and you just change it until it's almost unrecognizable. But like if you draw it back, you see where it comes from, and that becomes your fantasy race. Like any fantasy story that has a desert, like desert cultures in all stories are inspired by the desert cultures that exist on Earth.
Yeah.
And like cultures that live in the Arctic, they all are inspired by our cultures that live in those climates.
Yeah.
Like Vikings in every fantasy story, like whether they live in the plains or mountains or grasslands, like they're all inspired by the Vikings that we know.
Yeah.
Like how many times have you guys heard or read about like clones of Valhalla and like the beliefs of other tribes and stuff? Like,
yeah, because it's just you're taking it from here and you're putting it here. And I think I feel like the reason why a lot of people go to fantasy is you have something to say about the real world, but just to say it gets lost in the ether. Everyone has an opinion on something. Make me interested in why I should listen to yours. Okay, there's elves. All right, I'm in. Like, there's swords and magic. Okay, well, now I'm interested to hear what you have to say. And you can sort of say it without saying it by having it exist in a different world where, the story is as important as the message that's coming across. And I feel like that's why a lot of people write these types of stories. And so, again, you come from what you know and what you want to say about the things you know. And then that's where we get fantasy races or cultures.
Okay. I don't know. See, like I guess like one of the biggest gripes I have towards that is just a lot of times it's just like stereotype that's just like produced. Like for example, like Vikings, like whereas like there's very like not very often do we see like I guess like the actual real world more closer to like real world equivalents. It's always like this I guess like made up Viking that's just like that you see all the time. Like
I definitely think there's room for it to get appropriative and disrespectful when you're doing that. So like obviously the best thing is if you're inspired by a culture or a race of people or a group of people, you should consult with those people to see how they feel like they want to be represented. And if you're going to borrow things from the culture, you should learn about the significance from it before you put that into your fantasy world, because what may seem to you like a cool celebration might be a very religious traditional thing. And should your book get adapted to a film at some point, you might be offending a lot of people by displaying those types of things. Something as simple as like sage, right? Like I feel like in a lot of movies and stuff that gets representation that's not really accurate, and to some people that might be offensive, right? But for other people, it's just like, oh, I thought it was a cool thing I put in my fantasy story, which I don't think is harmful, but it's ignorant, it's negligent, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you should do the research on anything you're inspired by. Like you should understand what you're pulling from and use it appropriately. But then I think in the context of stories, like you you get like those stereotypical representations because the characters in the story only interact with those races or cultures on a very surface level or not at all. For example, like with the Vikings, you often get the stereotypical big dude Viking characters because the only Vikings they're interacting with are like the soldiers. They're never like in their culture. They're never in their lands. So like, I think you run that risk when you're like, especially when you're interacting with that culture, like closely, like you're in their cities. There you see like if the author is ignorant or if they actually know what they're talking about with what they're pulling from.
Yeah. See,
Very
another shot at the Netflix adaptation of The Witcher is we rarely, like, one thing I noticed, especially in season 2, is we rarely see like whenever we're introduced to a character, like you never really hear like their full names or anything like that, or like where they come from and etc. Like, for example, like that while they like completely butchered like Kahir's character, like in he's like the dude who's like chasing down Siri in season 1.
I haven't. Oh yeah, that guy. The cap.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I haven't finished the series yet.
Damn. Are you in season 1?
I finished season 1. Yeah, I know that guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like he's like very, very important figure in the series, and like he's like, I feel like his like the way he's described or in like portrayed in the show is like incredibly surface level. But
most of the characters are, honestly.
Yeah. Also completely wrong too. Some of them, like, oh my god. Yeah.
I mean, dude,
man.
the showrunner has never read the books. Like,
I think that's foul. I
honestly
enjoyed the first season a lot. The few episodes I've seen of season 2, I enjoyed a lot. But knowing that upsets me because that just feels like the bare minimum, man. Like, and if you haven't read the books, what have you done? Played the games, which are in themselves not canon and fanfic in a certain way. Like, I don't know, that to me is not cool at all. I don't like knowing that.
Using fire magic is okay. It's just drawing upon fire as a fuel for your magic is bad. Contrary to the TV show.
Nerd.
Hey, everybody, this guy's a nerd. He's talking about fire magic. He's all upset about it.
Yeah. I think that's kind of it. I think next session I want to do like sports and fantasy.
Ooh.
Yeah, I was thinking I saw like the Warhammer Blood Bowl thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like fantasy football.
I actually have a lot of feelings about sports and fantasies. I'm glad you said it. And I'll say this right now because fuck J.K. Rowling. Quidditch is a dumbass sport. It's real dumb.
Quidditch is stupid.
It literally makes zero fucking sense.
Why do
you play the whole game, but one guy catches the thing and the game's over? It doesn't even like. We'll talk about it next week. Because I'm upset.